You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Well, here we are, a couple of days before the inauguration of a welcome new administration, which is taking place in a capital under armed guard by more than 20,000 National Guardsmen because of the past and threatened siege and assault by extremist right-wing militias and other, let's say it, terrorists, and which looks to be coordinated with attacks on all 50 local state capitals as well. Oh, also there's a pandemic raging at higher levels than ever before in this country, soon approaching the horrific death toll of 500,000 people. So how was your holiday hiatus? You know, as in the movie Jaws, just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, look, I've run out of denunciatory words for Donald Trump. There are none sufficiently scurrilous, numerous, criminal, and utterly mad to describe him. If the plans for a second impeachment do nothing else but drive home the necessity that he never be permitted to run again for any office, anywhere, anyhow, that will begin to address the problem. It has been so hard, even for those of us with fertile imaginations, to conceive of such a villain. Indeed, they said we were exaggerating, alarmist, hyperbolic. They said our pants were on fire and so was our hair. They said we were hysterical, that old standby usually employed against women sounding an alarm. Now we learn all over again and bitterly just how understated we in fact have been. Nevertheless, the Justice Department and the FBI have finally created a special sedition and conspiracy task force on this matter. Fortunately, the Joint Chiefs of Staff have issued military-wide memos condemning the Capitol riot and confirming Biden and Harris's election. Moreover, this episode of our show is about inaugurations, about turning a new leaf and new hope. At its best, that means a renewal of determination and a freshening of vision. Even at its worst, though, it means, in the true philosophical sense of the word, an existential insistence, a fist in the air, a cry of defiance. This program is dedicated to Lois Sasson, killed by COVID-19 on December 30th, 2020. More about that and her in fighting words at the end of this program. So let's get started by going inside the headlines. The history of our presidential inaugurations is impressive and somewhat bizarre. It also moves, with a few notable exceptions, from the meaningful and secular to the merely rhetorical and religionist. To begin with the most superficial aspect, the parade, that was begun by James Garfield in 1881 and features participants from all 50 states and the District of Columbia. This parade largely evolved from the post-inaugural procession to the White House, and that occurred as far back as Jefferson's second inauguration in 1805, when workers from the Washington Navy Yard, accompanied by military music, marched with the president on foot as he rode on horseback back to the White House from the Capitol. By the time of William Henry Harrison's inauguration in 1841, political clubs and marching societies would regularly travel to Washington for the parade. That year, 1841, was also the first in which floats were part of the parade. It was at Lincoln's second inauguration in 1865 that Native Americans and African Americans participated in the inaugural parade for the first time. Women were involved for the first time in 1917, but more about that later. There is no requirement that any book, including any book of religious text, be used to administer the oath, and none is mentioned in the Constitution. While most incoming presidents raise their right hand and place the left on a Bible or other book while taking the oath of office, John Quincy Adams did not use a Bible in 1825, and neither did Roosevelt, Theodore that is, in 1901. In 1853, Franklin Pierce affirmed the oath of office rather than swearing. Interesting. As for prayers, it's only since 1937, that late, that the ceremony has incorporated one or more prayers. But poetry seems to have found a place for itself. Starting with the inauguration of Kennedy in 1961, due to Jackie's efforts, Robert Frost read his poem, The Gift, outright. He was followed in 1993 by Maya Angelou at the first inauguration of Bill Clinton, by Miller Williams at the second inauguration of Clinton, and at the first and second inaugurations of Barack Obama, respectively, by Elizabeth Alexander and Richard Blanco. Go poets! But the speeches are the main feature, of course. Harrison delivered the longest inaugural address at 8,445 words in 1841. John Adams' 1797 address, totaling 2,308 words, contained the longest sentence at 737 words. In 1793, George Washington had given the shortest inaugural address on record, only 135 words, basically saying, "Look, I repeat what I said in my first inaugural address in 1789. But in that first address, he had ignored the Constitution and added 4 words to the oath, "So help me God," an example of which presidents have unfortunately followed ever since. A note, an aside, I have not adjusted the following quotes for gender or for race, so they have the original bigotry embedded in them. Jefferson's 1801 first inaugural address was largely devoted to trying to heal the intensely bitter contest with John Adams that had preceded it, so Jefferson leaned hard on the theme, "Every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. We have called by different names brother of the same principle. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists," alluding to the 2 then major parties. Interestingly, Jefferson devoted an unusually lengthy portion of his 1805 second inaugural address to Native Americans. He started out well enough by saying, quote, "The aboriginal inhabitants of these countries I have regarded with the commiseration their history inspires. Endowed with the faculties and the rights of men, breathing an ardent love of liberty and independence, and occupying a country which left them a desire to be undisturbed, the stream of overflowing population from other regions directed itself on these shores, without power to divert or habits to contend against. They have been overwhelmed by the current or driven before it, now reduced within limits too narrow for the hunter's state. Humanity enjoins them," and here we run off the rails, with Thomas going on and on about teaching them agriculture and the domestic arts, encouraging them to industry, etc., etc., patronizing deluge of advice. He did note, in passing, however, that they, like other too familiar humans, are, quote, "combated by the prejudice of their minds, ignorance, pride, and the influence or interest of crafty individuals among them who feel themselves something in the present order of things and fear to become nothing in any other. These persons inculcate a sanctimonious reverence for the customs of their ancestors. Then whatever they did must be done through all time. That reason is a false god, and to advance under its counsel in their physical, moral, or political condition is perilous innovation, that their duty is to remain as their Creator made them, ignorance being safety and knowledge full of danger. In short, my friends, among them is seen the action and counteraction of good sense and bigotry. They, too, have their anti-philosophers, who find an interest in keeping things in their present state, who dread reformation, and exert all their faculties to maintain the ascendancy of habit over the duty of improving our reason and obeying its mandates." Close quote. Jefferson could just as well have been describing contemporary arch-conservatives, don't you think? In 1817, James Monroe chose to address the issue of intelligence in the populace. "The government has been in the hands of the people," he said. "It is only when the people become ignorant and corrupt, when they degenerate into a populace, that they are incapable of exercising sovereignty. Usurpation is then an easy attainment, and a usurper soon found. The people themselves become the willing instruments of their own debasement and ruin. Let us, then, endeavor to preserve the great cause in full force. Let us, by all wise and constitutional measures, promote intelligence among the people as the best means of preserving our liberties." Lincoln's first inaugural address in 1861, on the cusp of civil war, boldly stated, "Plainly, the central idea of secession is the essence of anarchy. A majority held in restraint by constitutional checks and limitations, and always changing easily with deliberate changes of popular opinions and sentiments, is the only true sovereign of a free people. Whoever rejects it does of necessity fly to anarchy." But by his second inaugural address in 1865, in the waning days of the war, Lincoln was in the thick of it. He said, "All dreaded it, all sought to avert it. While the inaugural address was being delivered from this place, devoted altogether to saving the Union without war, insurgent agents were in the city seeking to destroy it without war, seeking to dissolve the Union and divide its effects by negotiation. Both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish, and the war came. 1/8 of the whole population were colored slaves, not distributed generally over the Union, but localized in the southern part of it. These slaves constituted a peculiar and powerful interest. All knew that this interest was somehow the cause of the war. To strengthen, perpetuate, and extend this interest was the object for which the insurgents would rend the Union even by war, while the government claimed no right to do more than to restrict the territorial enlargement of it. Neither party expected for the war the magnitude or the duration which it has already attained. Neither anticipated that the cause of the conflict might cease with, or even before the conflict itself should cease. Each looked for an easier triumph and a result less fundamental and astounding. Both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any men should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces, but let us judge not that we be not judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. And Lincoln ended pleading, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us drive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations." Close quote. Although few have reached the eloquence of Lincoln, inaugural speeches are usually aspirational. In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt, at his first inaugural address, promised famously, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself," cribbing from Thoreau, who had originally written, "Nothing is so much to be feared as fear," in his journal on September 7, 1851. At FDR's second inaugural, he proclaimed, perhaps prematurely, "We are beginning to abandon our tolerance of the abuse of power by those who betray for profit the elementary decencies of life. Hard-headedness will not so easily excuse hard-heartedness." And by the third term, he had really hit his stride about democracy, which had, quote, "successfully survived crisis at home, put away many evil things, built new structures on enduring lines, and through it all maintained the fact of its democracy. The Bill of Rights," he said, "remains inviolate. The freedom of elections is wholly maintained. Prophets of the downfall of American democracy have seen their dire predictions come to naught. Democracy is not dying. We know it because we've seen it revive and grow. We know it cannot die because it is built on the unhampered initiative of individual men and women joined in a common enterprise, undertaken and carried through by the free expression of a free majority. For it is the most humane, the most advanced, and in the end the most unconquerable of all forms of human society." Close quote. Heartening words for today. John F. Kennedy's declaration, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country," continued that aspirational tone, predicting a better future, together with Barack Obama's, "On this day we gather because we've chosen hope over fear, unity of purpose over conflict and discord. In the year of America's birth, in the coldest of months, a small band of patriots huddled by dying campfires on the shores of an icy river. The capital was abandoned. The enemy was advancing. The snow was stained with blood. At a moment when the outcome of our revolution was most in doubt, the father of our nation ordered these words be read to the people. Let it be told to the future world that in the depth of winter, when nothing but hope and virtue could survive, that the city and the country, alarmed at one common danger, came forth to meet it." Only in 2016, with Donald Trump's darkly threatening American carnage speech, did the population begin to fathom that that was a prediction, too. It's time for our first break, but there's lots more to come. But not before, in the next segment, we make a slight detour into the surrealism corner. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
If we are about to embark on a new presidency and new hope, right in the midst of a pandemic and a fragmented society, why, we must be in the surrealism corner. Our presidential inaugurations have not been without their own surreal elements all along. For example, when Andrew Jackson was inaugurated for his first term in 1829, he invited a raucous crowd of 20,000 of his supporters to celebrate with him at the White House after taking the oath of office. Well, that celebration turned into a brawl, complete with broken furniture and smashed crystal. Jackson himself was forced to escape by jumping through a window. Jackson, by the way, with his Indian killer nickname, racism, and great hair as well as authoritarian tendencies, was, not surprisingly, Trump's favorite president. In 1841, despite freezing weather on William Henry Harrison's inauguration day, the incoming president, who was also a war hero, struck his macho pose in refusing to wear a coat or hat and insisted on riding back to the White House on horseback instead of in a covered carriage. He also delivered, as I mentioned earlier, the longest address in inaugural history, which took more than 2 hours to read. This loquacious exposure turned into a cold shortly after his inauguration, and that became pneumonia, and he died on April 4th, 1841, just 31 days after taking office. James Buchanan stayed at the National Hotel the night before his inauguration in 1857, and that hotel ended up being the epicenter of an outbreak of a mysterious illness known as the National Hotel Disease. It sickened 400 people and claimed 36 lives, including those of 3 congressmen. The new president was twice infected by it. Rumors, aided by sensationalistic newspaper reports, spread that the victims had been poisoned by arsenic, the result of a botched assassination attempt on Buchanan, who was once called a Northern man with Southern principles by radical abolitionists. Historians now believe that the outbreak was simply dysentery, a result not of a conspiracy but of the hotel's primitive sewage system. Buchanan himself was fortunate to have survived it, but many historians regard his failure to treat the threat of civil war seriously as the worst presidential mistake ever made. Fast forward to 1961 and John F. Kennedy's inauguration, which was chock full of unscripted moments. First, Lyndon B. Johnson botched his vice presidential oath by saying, "without any mental reservation whatsoever," rather than "without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion." Second, the podium caught fire because of an electrical short in the power system, while Cardinal Richard Cushing was delivering the invocation. Finally, the poet Robert Frost, who had written an original composition for the occasion, was unable to read it due to the sun's glare on snow that had fallen the night before. So Frost didn't read his new poem, Dedication, opting instead to deliver the poem The Gift outright, which he'd written earlier and which he fortunately knew by memory. Jimmy Carter, after taking the oath in a $175 suit bought a week earlier in his home state of Georgia, surprised onlookers when he and his family emerged from the presidential limousine to walk at the head of his inaugural parade in January 1977. The only other president to do so had been Thomas Jefferson at his first inaugural in 1803. Much like Jefferson, Carter wanted to be seen as the people's president, and his decision to walk in the open made a dramatic statement. By contrast, Nixon's limo had been escorted by an armed guard, including 3,000 district police, 5,000 regular troops, and 1,000 National Guard at his first inauguration in 1969. In Carter's, his 9-year-old daughter Amy even skipped on the way back to the White House. Presidents after Carter would follow his example and walk for at least part of the process. Barack Obama's first inauguration in 2009, well, he and Chief Justice John Roberts crossed signals while Roberts was administering the oath of office in front of a record-breaking crowd of nearly 2 million people. Obama inadvertently interrupted Roberts. Then the Chief Justice, who was not using notes, flubbed the wording of the oath, saying, "That I will execute the office of President of the United States faithfully," rather than the exact wording, "that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States." As Obama then repeated Roberts' incorrect wording, constitutional scholars questioned whether he'd been properly sworn in, so Obama and Roberts wound up doing the whole thing over at the White House the following day. And at Donald J. Trump's first, last, and only inauguration, he delivered a uniquely dark, toxic speech about American carnage that had even George W. Bush murmuring in a clearly audible whisper to Barack Obama, "What the bleep was that crap about?" The worst was yet to come. But then there's this flash backward story. In 1913, Woodrow Wilson's presidency was overshadowed by a historic event, a massive suffrage parade that relegated his inauguration to a historical footnote. This was more than a century before the Women's March captured the nation's attention, but it set the stage for Wilson's turbulent relationship with the women's movement. At the time, the concept of suffrage for women was still quite unpopular in the United States. Although suffragists had long agitated for the vote, their movement felt stagnant, it lacked national support, and the defeat of Teddy Roosevelt's Progressive Party in the recent election felt like a further blow to the prospect of suffrage. Well, the national movement might have lacked energy, but Alice Paul did not. She was 28 years old. She'd just returned to the States from a kind of suffrage apprenticeship in England, where she became friends with radical suffragists and learned about their militant tactics. And she was passionately committed to the cause. So she proposed that the National American Women's Suffrage Association, known as NAWSA, N-A-W-S-A, hold a parade demanding a constitutional suffrage amendment and that they take advantage of the crowds and the press that were sure to descend on Washington for Wilson's inauguration. She chose the most visible, symbolically powerful route possible. She insisted on a route that passed down Pennsylvania Avenue, as close as possible to crowds that had gathered for the inauguration and to American landmarks like the Capitol and the White House. And when she was told by the police that it was totally unsuitable for women to be marching down Pennsylvania Avenue, she knew she had her route. Other women used their political and family connections to pressure the police chief into changing his mind. Finally, faced with a danger to police funds, funding, the chief relented. So, though the national women's movement agreed that the parade should be rife with political and social symbolism, they couldn't agree on how to deal with black suffragists. Washington was segregated at the time, and Paul feared that allowing black women in the parade would alienate Southern white suffragists. So she quietly discouraged their participation, and NAWSA decided tragically that black suffragists march at the back of the parade. Some complied, but Ida B. Wells refused to march in a segregated group. "Either I go with you or not at all," she told the Illinois delegation. "I am not taking this stand because I personally wish for recognition. I am doing it for the future benefit of my whole race." On the day of the parade, Wells marched with the Illinois delegation, not with the black suffragists. On that day, thousands of women, as many as 10,000, massed at the Capitol. At the front of the parade was Inez Milholland, a pioneering suffragist atop a white horse, followed by women from countries that allowed women to vote, by suffrage pioneers, and by NAWSA state delegations. The world had never seen such a well-organized, impressive suffrage spectacle before. It wouldn't until the Women's March. It was a smashing success and a turning point. By overshadowing Wilson's inauguration, the suffragists made it clear they wouldn't be ignored, and they followed through with years of clashes with Wilson on behalf of suffrage, and in 1919, the passage of the 19th Amendment. And that was not at all surreal. Time for our last break, but then I'll be back directly with some fighting words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
An elegy can contain fighting words. On December 30th, 2020, Lois Diane Sasson finally succumbed to COVID-19. She was not young. She was a multiple cancer survivor, as well as a survivor of Lyme's disease and various other respiratory illnesses. She was also witty, intelligent, an intrepid feminist, an artist, and my friend of 46 years. She was my proverbial sister. She was perhaps the last of the truly great dames. It was inconceivable that Lois actually, truly, really could die. She was simply too much alive, texting to the very last, "Can't talk, can laugh," because the oxygen mask muffled her speech. When she became furious at her condition, fighting for her life exhaustively for almost 3 weeks, she texted, "Trump hate helps." So I found myself joining those legions of people all over the world, traumatized when COVID comes to your doorstep, separated from isolated friends or family, wringing hands with helplessness, never apart from a cell phone because some news, good or bad, might come, because you can't reach them, can't touch them, can't feel them, can't be there. But not Lois. Surely not. Lois was somehow in motion forever, intensely alive. Tiny, elegant, fastidious, and with a dry, devastating sense of humor. She was the opposite of the fair-weather friend. She was the foul-weather friend. If you were down and out, you needed a place to stay or someone to talk to or money or needed, well, anything. There she was, solid as a rock, grounded, organized, practical, wise. It was just in normal everyday life that she could seem sometimes maddening, spreading the largesse of herself all over the place, generous beyond a fault. She was like a massive waterfall in eternal flow over your head, whether you were thirsty or not. Lois missed this latest Trump obscenity, his inciting sedition against the U.S. government, an act that resulted in devastation, chaos, insurrection, and 5 deaths, and an act that's not finished yet. Her outrage, spewing from a petite, chic, frail little body, would have been palpable. Where was everybody? The police, Capitol and D.C., the FBI, Homeland Security. Where indeed? Now it turns out, some of them knew after all and beforehand. Now it turns out some of the desecrators were members of the military, members of the cops. These weren't just the wounded white working class or the crazies in costumes, though they were certainly present. These included elected politicians and well-to-do conservative business owners. For our part, we can no longer refuse to see that the ridiculous and the lethal can be one and the same, because they're not two separate things anymore. Flagpoles become javelins. Street barriers were turned into battering rams. Fire extinguishers were used to bash in skulls. The slow, steady drip of videos keeps coming in, and what looked at first to be a violating, rowdy protest now clarifies itself as a deliberately murderous attempted coup. We were moments, seconds away from a likely massacre of public officials, assassinations of the Vice President and Speaker of the House, a bloodbath, a lynching in Congress. Lois's sweet face and small, delicate, loud mouth would have been spilling obscenities at not only those who committed the violence, but at all those who minimized the peril, who euphemized the racism and sexism so blatantly evident, who dismissed the anxiety, who trivialized the fear. She would have sent blistered speech in the direction of Republicans, who only got concerned once NIMBY had been deployed. You remember NIMBY? Not in my backyard? Not when it affected them. Her indignation was matched only by her love. And that love spilled over from knowing and rather forcibly relaying the full life story back 3 generations of the cab driver who drove her to meet you, to dinner itself, to good food and wine, lobster dripping with butter sauce, her special scallops with just a hint, a perfume of garlic, fried potatoes and onions with rosemary, ripe summer tomatoes with basil, in good Sicilian olive oil. The best, she'd proclaim, the best. But not just food. Sunsets and Brahms and Billie Holiday, and all humanity, and me. What an appetite for living. How she loved my little garden in the city, the magic garden, she called it. She would sometimes surprise me with an unbirthday present, like a white fringed orchid, just because. We'd always planned to hold an anniversary party for our friendship. Why, we wondered, do they have anniversaries for relationships like lovers and marriage, but not for friendships that may last as long or longer? Having missed the chance a number of times, we were now aiming for the 50th anniversary of being friends. We never made it. The largely white, largely male mob that desecrated the Congress of the United States on Wednesday and has vowed to do so again has no way of fathoming such love. For one thing, it takes noticing detail. Love specifies. Hate generalizes. For another thing, it requires an appreciation of beauty. Lois, among other vocations, was the designer of fine jewelry, including the award bracelets specifically cast for the Women's Media Center Gala Annual Awards. For a third thing, such love requires a sense of humor. Here's Lois in defense of me about an ex-husband. I'll flay him for a rug. Lois mulling a photograph of my new lover. Definitely not a vegetarian. Lois, who would snort wryly, with my luck, when I'm dying and people say, "There, see the light? Go into the light. I won't be able to find the goddamn light. Where, I'll say, where is the freaking light?" And we would dissolve in laughter while the tears fell. And I'd say, Okay, I promise I'll stand there and beam a flashlight at your eyes so you can see the goddamn light, okay? Except I wasn't there. They wouldn't let me be there. So now I call and call your empty apartment, the phone's rings echoing through the silence, just to hear your voice, brisk and chirpy on the answering machine. This is Lois. Leave me a message. Make it short and sweet. Now you might add, I'm well out of it, baby. It's yours to deal with now. And I laugh softly until the tears fall. Because you're right. It's ours to deal with. From the terrorists to the hopes of a new inauguration. From the lives we've lost to the election we won. I don't know what the inauguration will bring. But oh, Lois, I know that your fringed white orchid bloomed today. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag Fighting Words. And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at The Robin Morgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor Regina K. Scully, WMC president and co-executive producer of this program Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.